Hey everybody, it's your friend Adam. I'm not sure if we're live or not. We're just going to give it a second to so
We are
Sitch can.
live.
We are live. Okay, cool. So we're here with Matt Greene. Matt Greene wrote an article for the UK Independent, and we were going to talk to him. I reached out to him on Twitter. Actually, we're getting the streams dropping out a bit here. Can I get you guys to test your mics?
Hey now.
Okay. So it
Is
looks
that a
like
hand?
it looks like we're back. Hopefully, we'll be up strong enough. But so Matt had written an article at the UK Independent that was fairly critical of Jordan Peterson. I reached out to him on Twitter and just said, "Hey, do you want to talk about this?" My friend Sitch and I are what you would call Jordan Peterson fans, and we just thought we would have a conversation. We were talking before the live stream began about how Twitter's just a terrible place to do this kind of thing anyway. So thanks for coming on, Matt.
Thanks for having me. I'm really pleased you got in touch.
Yeah, we have some questions for you. You had some questions for us. Maybe we'll just go first. I mean, I'm curious how these articles are pitched. Do you pitch the UK Independent, or do they come to you and say, "Hey, we need an article on this or that"?
Well, that can vary enormously, actually. Ordinarily, you would pitch to a newspaper. Most newspapers now are operating with large freelance departments, or well, not departments, obviously, but a large amount of freelancers that they work with. So it's kind of common that you would pitch to them. In some instances, and in this instance, in fact, it's possible that a newspaper might come to you if something is in your wheelhouse, if it's something that you've written on in the past, or if it's something that you have sort of overlapping interest with. So it can really vary, and it depends from paper to paper and editor to editor.
So how did this particular article come to play? Did they come to you, or did you pitch it to them?
So I write quite a lot about anti-Semitism.
Oh,
It's
okay.
something that I've been studying for quite a while, and I had written a piece for the Independent. Actually, my first piece for the Independent a few months ago on the subject of contemporary Holocaust denial and contemporary Holocaust revisionism. And I would quickly say, by the way, before this is misinterpreted, that I don't feel that the clip to which the article referred falls into that category. But it is certainly of interest to me. And in fact, they got in touch and asked if I wanted to write something on this subject. Interestingly, and obviously, I'm sure a lot of this discussion will be about Jordan Peterson. But the article itself is probably more focused towards the situation in America, and particularly the US-Mexico border. The images that were coming out of there this week, the tear gas canisters being fired at toddlers, and in particular Lindsey Graham's defense of this and his picking a battle on Twitter with I'm not sure how you refer to her there. Is she AOC, or does no one call her that? Alexandria.
I think AOC is fine.
Okay.
It's Alexandria Cortez. She's a congresswoman that was just elected. She's a outspoken socialist, correct? Yeah.
Well, I guess it all depends on the circles you move in. To my circle, she's not all that outspoken.
Oh,
yes.
she's a Democrat. She's democratic socialist in the vein of Bernie Sanders, so it's a bit different.
Self-declared, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, this drew together several threads that I'm very interested in, and it brought Jordan Peterson into my sphere of interest a little bit more than he had been. He's always been quite peripheral. Most of what I've read of Jordan Peterson has come in quotation marks, I would say.
What do you mean by that?
Oh, what I mean is that he is. I mean, like you say, and I think this was before we went live. We were talking about how he's very much a lightning rod for a kind of cultural moment that we're in, and I think one of the things we wanted to talk about was how two people or two groups of people can interpret something in a completely different way, which is something that obviously is a key part of these cultural times that we find ourselves in. So in the UK, the kind of publications that I would read, he is becoming more of a figure here since his book was released here. And since he was interviewed on Channel 4 one of our national TV stations back in January, I believe, and that got quite a lot of traction here. So he is someone that maybe sort of reached these shores a little bit after his exposure on the other side of the Atlantic, and a lot of what is written here about him is pretty skeptical. It would be fair to say. So when I say I've read a lot of his work in quotation, what I mean is I've read quite a lot of his opinions, but they are mostly put alongside the opinions of those who would debunk is not really a word that I like very much because it
disagree.
Critical of.
Yeah, it implies an absolute, which I don't think is necessarily relevant here, because I don't think that everything he says needs to be debunked, and I don't disagree with everything he says. And I think there is some factual basis to a fair bit of it. But as I say, his general Weltanschauung is definitely viewed through a skeptical lens here.
Now
So
are
this
you?
is-
Go ahead, Sitch.
So this is so would it be fair to say like this was your first foray into like really looking at a Jordan Peterson clip and deciding to, form write about it?
I could sense the question beneath that, which was my first time deciding to form an opinion about it.
Well, I mean, because you were saying that, you've only seen him through other people's works. So I guess what I'm asking is this the first time you actually saw like a specific clip and made up, your own opinion about seeing something firsthand?
No, it's not my first clip that I've seen of his work.
Okay.
Well, you've probably seen the Channel 4 interview. You mentioned it.
Yeah, I've seen the Channel 4 interview.
Right,
I actually been interviewed by an Australian comedian called Jim Jeffries, and I have to say, that was actually my first exposure to him, and I was quite surprised with that because there's a moment in that where I think he comes across as really quite humble. He's sort of I wouldn't say sort of tricked into a philosophical bind, but he's asked a couple of questions in which he is presented as though he's contradicted himself. And I was very impressed that at that point he went back to his previous answer and he revised it and he said that he had probably been wrong in that instance. And I don't think that's something we see enough of. So I was actually quite pleasantly predisposed towards him from that clip, I have to say. That does not hold for a lot of the things that I've read of his. I do maintain that he is, unfortunately, in the culture as we live in, quite a dangerous voice to have been amplified as loud as it has been. And yeah, I guess we're going to get on to talk about that.
Sitch, you want to go ahead and take the floor?
Sure. Well, in the article that you wrote, I guess my first question is, you categorize.
Well, before you go on there, I mean, you
Okay.
say he's a dangerous voice. How exactly do you mean he's a dangerous voice? Just to get some clarity there.
Yeah. So one of the questions that we the last question kind of touched on this a little bit, and we've touched on it already. There is a wider context to all of this, of course, and there's partly to Jordan Peterson fans. There's a larger context to his work, and there's a larger context to the points that he's making, and that's undoubtedly true. But there is, of course, a much larger and more important context that exists outside the work of Jordan Peterson. We are living, as we've discussed, in a very interesting cultural moment. But I think something that is less discussed is that we're living in quite an interesting historical moment. Now, the thing that I have been interested in a while, I've written a lot about, and have been concerned about for a while, is the fact that we are living through a time in which the Holocaust is moving from lived experience, so moving from first generation survivors to second generation survivors. So we're moving from something being lived memory to history. Now, this is something that a lot of people have probably been concerned about for a while. There's an organisation in the UK which does some fantastic work called the Holocaust Educational Trust. And they have been preparing for this transition for a long time because it's often been suspected that as this happens, it is going to coincide with people dragging the Holocaust into question in a way that has been harder to do when there have been lived victims of it. Now, let me clarify again. I do not believe that this is what Jordan Peterson is doing. However, this is all part of a very key context that he is a part of, that we are all a part of. Now, within that context, and something we have actually, before we get into the specifics of that clip and that article, something that we see a lot of, and interestingly,
do you feel like he supports Holocaust denial in any way, or okay?
No, but I would like to come back to
okay.
this. I've got more context I want to get to before I get into why I believe the clip the article is based on is so irresponsible and so dangerous.
Okay.
And really, I'm not going to. Well, perhaps you'll be able to assuage some of my fears, but I'm certainly not coming here to tell you that, you know.
Well, we're not Holocaust denialists.
No.
Yes, Sitch is one of the chosen people, so.
Exactly. I don't want to get too sidetracked from the point that I want to make, but this actually is part of that wider problem that we have is that, you know, everyone can. Actually, we'll leave that one side. We'll get back to it.
Okay.
So within this context, the Holocaust moving into history as opposed to lived memory, you have a real upswing in Holocaust denial and Holocaust revisionism, two things that we see a lot of in the UK. And interestingly, in the UK, are not split along traditional left-right lines. You might assume that this is the practice of, you know, a far right. Not necessarily the case here. It seems to be almost a cross. I don't want to say party, but across the spectrum, there are those who feel very comfortable questioning some of the facts of the Holocaust. Alongside this, you have a movement which I do think Jordan Peterson is maybe starting to, would be unfair to say flirt with, but certainly in the clip that has been shared so widely is definitely moving towards. And it's a sort of intellectual attempt to re-examine some of Hitler's motivations, some of Hitler's psychology, with a view to I'm not sure what. And the clip in particular, what alarmed me about it most, and I realized that this is a little bit unfair to Jordan Peterson and his fans, because I know that Jordan Peterson is not a Holocaust denier. I don't even think necessarily that he's a Holocaust minimizer. No, I'll scrap the necessarily. I don't believe he is a Holocaust minimizer. However, I do believe that if you are in the fortunate or unfortunate enough position to have a clip of you talking about Hitler's psychology shared millions and millions of times and have millions of people view that, millions of people who see you as an authority on these matters, I think it is only right that that receives a proper level of scrutiny. Now, by his own reckoning, Jordan Peterson chooses his words very carefully. So I think it's right that we get to analyze those words and get to take them seriously. So the clip that I was exposed to begins with a couple of quotes that I think are very interesting. The first thing he talks about is how, and I think this is the quote, the thing with Hitler is that he was very sensitive to disgust. It's one of the first quotes. He went on to explain that Hitler was disgusted by the Jews. Now, this is something that immediately my ears kind of prick up. My background is in linguistics, and there's something very interesting about that second construction just by itself. Hitler was disgusted by the Jews. Now, that may appear to be a fairly neutral and uncontroversial statement, but if you put it alongside something which to me is possibly a good baseline for this, Hitler hated the Jews, you can actually begin to see that there's a world of difference between the two. And the world of difference is located in two places. One, it's in the syntax. In Hitler hated the Jews, we have something in the active voice. This is something Hitler is doing. If you have Hitler was disgusted by the Jews, Hitler, although he's in the subject position, is no longer the agent of that sentence. In fact, if you want to turn it into an active voice construction, which is something that we as native English speakers are more comfortable with doing, you actually end up with the Jews disgusted Hitler. It's a very, very different proposition to Hitler hated the Jews. Now, there is a fundamental difference between hatred and disgust as well. Hatred is obviously something that I think the locus of that is maybe the head and the heart, I guess you could say. Whereas disgust, and this is obviously something Jordan Peterson, as a keen amateur in the field of evolutionary biology will know is a biological mechanism intended to prevent us from causing ourselves too much harm. It's what stops toddlers from eating dog shit. Stops them.
Sorry to interrupt, but I completely understand where you're going, and it's fascinating because I never really considered the context there. But the problem that you have is when you're using the word hatred, then all of a sudden Hitler is culpable for his actions. But when you use disgust, somehow he's not necessarily morally culpable because it's a biologically mechanistic thing, and that you feel that is dangerous.
I feel like what that clip that has been shared millions of times amounts to, and I don't believe this is necessarily Jordan Peterson's. I mean, actually, I'll go further. I don't believe this is Jordan Peterson's wider agenda, but I do think it is part of something about his work that maybe we'll touch on in a minute. Sorry, I forgot what I was saying. What was the question?
It's interesting to me because my background is in moral psychology. So this is all very, very interesting because it relates to moral psychology very much so. But you want to make a final point, and then I know Sitch wants to address the clip. So
yeah, no, I'd love to talk about that. Yeah, my final point would be that ultimately we are looking at a clip that is very open to the interpretation that Hitler was less morally culpable. There's a diminished personal responsibility than we might have thought going in. Now, I think that in itself is quite an interesting idea because, of course, we're talking about humanizing a human. And that, of course, is in a sense a paradox because Hitler has been widely accepted as a historical demon. But I personally don't actually see what the benefit is in applying more imaginative empathy to young Hitler in the cultural moment that we're doing, unless it's to warn us about, germaphobes who have a habit of othering people through their rhetoric. And that does not appear to be where Jordan Peterson is going with any of this. So I can't see anything other than what I think is a strain of intellectual vanity on his part for him to be attempting, with, of course, I know he's not a psychiatrist, but no psychiatrist would make a diagnosis on a public figure. That's something that's happening quite a lot in American journalism. There seems to be quite a few calls for psychiatrists to write articles about how Trump is insane, and that would, of course, be a failure of their ethics because having not met with him and having not properly undergone any analysis, you can't do that. And that obviously applies doubly to historical figures who died before we were born.
Sitch, let me jump in here. I know Sitch wants to talk a bit about the clip.
I think the point about order and discuss, I get completely, and I think that's an interesting point that I didn't think about that.
Yeah, me neither.
And I can completely see where you're coming from. And I think unfortunately, it falls into that stereotypical Jordan Peterson problem, which is that often he's talking about some specific concept that he's talked about before. And with the discuss thing, he's talked about that a lot in terms of that there are personality types and that people that have high order personality types, so people who are anti-openness, and the thing that motivates order personality types is a form of disgust. So he's not saying it in terms of like, Hitler felt some visceral feeling, thus he's justified or relinquished responsibility for his actions. He's saying in terms of disgust is the mechanism in which humans use to make these sort of racialized judgments and segregate people into these neat little boxes of whether you like someone or you don't like someone. As you were saying, because he has that evolutionary background. So evolutionarily, our brain ties in racism often to disgust. So I understand what you're saying, and I can see how it can be interpreted that, but I don't think that was at all his intention to disassociate responsibility from Hitler?
I think there's a very interesting word you use there, and there's so much interesting about this discussion, and I'm sorry that it's going to be as brief as it's probably going to be. The word intention that you just ended on, I think actually that is a really key word when we think about the cultural moment that we are living in. And I don't want to I don't want to call it a culture war, because that suggests that there's going to be a victor and there's going to be a loser, and this is not how we make any kind of attempts to repair this situation. But I think one thing I do think does have a fairly even split along left-right divides right now is the import of intent versus effect. And I personally, and this is something that I think about a lot writing about anti-Semitism, because a lot of anti-Semitic language is not necessarily coming from a place of intent. That does not mean it does not have power. It does not have the power to hurt, and it does not have the power to diminish. I would think possibly, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I think it seems to me that the Republican side of the debate in America, the fuck your feelings side of the debate in America, I think intent is considered more important than effect. And I think there is probably more of an emphasis on effect and less of an emphasis on intent on the Democratic left side of things. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I don't know if that's something.
Well, let's.
I mean,
Sitch, you.
I think you're.
Go. You know this clip specifically, so that's why I'm just. You had a problem with you saying some of it was out of context, so I just want to make sure.
Well, first, I'll answer the about the intention, the effect. I think you're right in terms of how the left-right divide sees what's more important, I guess.
Right.
I think that's a really deep issue to break apart, and we don't have time to go into like what is more important, intent or effect. But I guess kind of related to that is because it seemed like you're saying that you had a big problem with him psychoanalyzing Hitler or trying to come up with any sort of psychological reasons for these actions. And I guess so. My question to that is, in the clip, well, I don't know which clip you saw. I don't know if you saw the longer clip or just the one that was on Twitter that was only like 2 minutes long. The person he's talking to, Ethan Klein, who is Jewish and is married to an Israeli woman, they're asking him specifically. He specifically asked him, when it comes to Nazis, what turns an ordinary man into a Nazi, into a monster? So he's specifically answering a question about the psychology of transforming someone into that kind of person.
Yes, but there is already an implication in that question that this is a transformation that ignores a history of anti-Semitism in Europe that obviously massively predates Hitler. And obviously he is standing very much on the shoulder of giants when it comes to Jew haters. And to couch it in the terms of evolutionary biology, even if these are terms that he is using elsewhere within his work, I think personally, I can't really see any intellectual or moral benefit to it.
Can I jump in there, because there is a huge. You've helped us understand your perspective very well, and let me try to explain what's going on, because Jordan Peterson isn't the only one talking about this stuff. If you know the work of Brett Weinstein, he also talks about this. He recently did a debate with Richard Dawkins where they talked about this. And from the idea of evolutionary psychology, he's saying that a lot of these programs are running unconsciously. And obviously, Hitler would not have the power to persuade the people if the people didn't have this program running inside them as well. There's also the work of Karen Stenner, who's done extensive work on the authoritarian personality. And she says, like, authoritarianism really isn't authoritarianism. She's done studies to back this up with evidence, is sort of a switch that flips inside people. And most authoritarians are just normal people. But when they sense that society is moving in the wrong direction and the rules are running out, then this switch flips and they look for strongman leaders that come in and basically turn us into the terrible society that developed during the Holocaust. So when they're looking at this problem, they're looking for ways that we can circumvent that biological imperative, kind of the same way that we've circumvented our biology through birth control, through eyeglasses, through all kinds of different means. But if we don't understand that biology and that psychology and that evolutionary psychology, which it's very difficult to have these conversations, it's very difficult to figure that stuff out if you can't have these conversations, then how are we ever going to be able to circumvent it?
I think that's a really interesting point, but it does bring me back to another concern I have specifically about the work of Jordan Peterson, and the concern that I specifically have about him addressing these issues, which is that there are areas of his work in which he doesn't appear to be attempting to circumvent what he sees as biological factors. He seems to believe in a kind of biological determinism, which to his mind overrides cultural norms, overrides cultural pressures, and is, as he sees it, and maybe I'm mischaracterizing him, please do let me know.
I think you are. I think you are a bit.
In some of the research he's done, and obviously there's the maybe it's not much maligned over in LA, but in London the lobster chapter is a little bit of a joke here, because this is an example of someone who is choosing something very arbitrary and very selective to
you've been very
behavioral norm that he observes. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
You've been very generous with your time, and I know that you've got to go soon, but just to get to this idea of biology versus culture, Jordan Peterson's position, I would believe is that biology has an effect and culture also has an effect, but culture serves the biology. What exactly is you're saying that he thinks biology is all important and culture is completely irrelevant? Because culture.
I don't think that, but I sorry, I'm talking over you, Adam. This is not the purpose of this. I'm sorry.
No. I'm curious because you made a point that you're saying that you believe this biological determinism is dangerous, and it lies on a spectrum. There is people who believe biology is everything and culture has no effect, and there are people that believe culture is everything and biology has no effect. And really, the truth is somewhere in between. And I'm just you're making a case that the Jordan Peterson having this biological determinist outlook, it kind of offends your sensibility somewhat. I'm just trying to understand that a bit more, because he definitely understands. I mean, he's like a proponent of marriage and traditional values, those kinds of things, and those are cultural. Those aren't biological by any means whatsoever.
Of course. So let's take a case study. So we're talking about a specific, and then we can go back into the abstract if we need to. So let's look at the gender pay gap, which I know is something that he has written on and has feelings on. And again, it's something that I've read about in quotation from him. Now, my understanding, and please jump in and interrupt me if I'm misinterpreting this or mischaracterizing it, is that this is more a function of how our biology has organized our societies than it is something that we should be concerned with and concerned about eliminating. So I think that in itself, and as you say, these two things are very difficult to tease apart, biology and culture. But if you look at something that's happened in the last 20 years, if you look at Iceland, where in 2004, I believe, the gender pay gap was almost identical to the gender pay gap in the US. It was about 81 cents on the dollar, or the equivalent of that women were earning as opposed to men. Now, obviously a small part of that is down to discrimination, which is obviously something we can all agree we need to work on. But there is another part of that that is due to the so-called motherhood penalty. The idea that it is still expected at some point that if a couple have children, a heteronormative heterosexual couple have children, that the mother will take on a greater role in the raising of that child, certainly in the early years, than the father will.
Do you think that's culturally imposed, or do you think that there's a desire women?
And the reason, one of the case studies that I want to sort of circle back to about that is what happened in Iceland. So in 2000, I believe it's the year 2000. But as I say, and I think this is kind of an important general point, I'm not an expert on this, so it's probably best to do your own Googling and your own research here as well. But I believe in the year 2000, the Icelandic government introduced legislation. They had several years earlier, they'd introduced mandatory 6 months maternal leave, maternal paid leave for new mothers, and that had had some effect in lightening the load of those new mothers, but of course had reimposed that cultural expectation that it would be the mother taking the time off work as opposed to the father. In around the year 2000, they introduced an equivalent paternity benefit. So this was actually a kind of use it or lose it kind of situation. So any new father could take 6 months off and look after his new children. If he didn't take it, he would lose the benefit. If he did take it, he got the benefit. And what they've seen as a result of that, and in just 20 years, or around 20 years, less than 20 years, I think, they've seen an almost an eradication of that pay gap, which suggests to me, based on those figures, that this is a cultural norm that had been imposed. And presumably, if this was so deeply embedded in our biology that it was just a reflection of it, then there would have been very little uptake on that, and this would have had much smaller effects than it obviously has had in such a short time. So it is very hard to tease apart whether something is biological and whether something is cultural. But I also think it's really important to, and it's really important to realize that given the opportunity to correct themselves, these cultural norms can change very quickly, and it can give us data that will allow us to have a more informed discussion about it.
Teasing apart, this is why it bothers me that these conversations are getting difficult to have, is because the way to tease apart the difference is to have these conversations. You said that you had some questions for us too. So
yeah, I like you say, when you got in touch, I was really pleased that you did, and again, thank you. And it's because, like we kind of were talking about before we went live in this chat, it's increasingly difficult to talk to people that you don't agree with. It's increasingly difficult to know what information that they're getting that you are not getting. And that is partly a result of how we curate our news, and partly algorithms beyond our control, and many other issues. But I've never actually spoken to self-identified Jordan Peterson fans. I want to know what is the appeal? Why this guy, and what is about his ideas that makes you so makes you identify with him?
You want to go, Sitch?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I have a good answer for that. I was more thinking about in terms of going back to what you were saying about the lobster hierarchy and how.
Sorry, I didn't finish that, did I? Sorry.
How a lot, and this gets repeated a lot. This is, I think, a good point of contention, because a lot of people bring the lobster thing up as ridiculous, that don't like Jordan Peterson, and the people that do like Jordan Peterson kind of look at it like they don't understand what the disconnect is. Because whenever this is brought up to Jordan Peterson about why is he comparing humans to lobsters, he repeatedly says the only point I'm making is that hierarchies exist biologically. I'm not saying that hierarchies are morally right or wrong, or that the hierarchies we exist in right now should not be changed in any way. All I'm saying is that hierarchies exist in nature, in our biology.
So
I don't see him using hierarchies existing in nature as an excuse for the wage gap.
Okay, I think it's probably fair to say that maybe is a little bit of a cheap shot on my part. It's something that is linked, hyperlinked in the article, so it's something that people are encouraged to read more about. And yeah, I can actually maybe see why that's got his hackles up.
Well, I don't think it's a cheap shot on your part. I think it's part of what you're talking about, the secondhand quoting that just constantly gets repeated, which a lot of Jordan Peterson fans don't understand where the confusion is coming from.
Just to sort of circle back a little bit to what you were saying about the existence of lobster hierarchies being used to prove the existence of hierarchies in nature, and this being a value neutral statement. That in itself, I do want to talk about a little bit, because of course, when it comes to this biological example, there are literally millions to choose from, and I understand why someone making the arguments that Jordan Peterson is making would choose to look at lobster society. But if you look at the actual evolutionary biological point of view, the way to sort of assess the relevance of one society's behavior on another is to look.
Your mic must be, you might be tapping on your mic. Your audio's going
sorry.
out.
Yeah. Is that better?
Yeah, that's much better.
Much better, yeah.
Okay, so should I repeat some of what I just said?
We got most of it. So the lobster hierarchy.
Okay, so as I say, it seems a very arbitrary and kind of confusing, possibly confused analogy to make if you are looking at it from the point of view of evolutionary biology. It seems very odd to me that we would have to go back to get to the shared ancestry between a human and a lobster, you have to go back to the evolution of separate orifices to shit from and eat from. Separate mouths and arseholes. This is a really long way back into evolutionary biology. We have to go to find common ancestry. And the fact that that common ancestor, based on its closest living ancestry, and again, I'm not a marine biologist, please check this out for yourself.
The only reason that he goes so far back is to show that we have been evolving with this evolutionary pressure of hierarchies for as long as the lobsters existed.
I'm sorry, what I was about to say is that if you look at the shared ancestor and the closest descendant of that shared ancestor, it has not evolved in a culturally hierarchical way. And that would suggest that if our common ancestor is not, then really nothing can be inferred from one to the other. There is nothing that...
What common ancestor? First of all, lobsters don't have culture. Culture is learned behavior. It's
sorry,
we can assume that the lobster is all biologically determined. So
I think they're just super into pixies and David Foster Wallace.
Once human beings adopted the idea that we were going to learn culture, like it completely changed the game. So, but all Jordan Peterson is saying with the lobster analogy, and the reason he goes back to lobsters is because it's so long ago that you agree with evolution that there are evolutionary pressures on species, correct?
It is so long ago as to not be relevant to how our society has developed.
It's relevant though to the evolutionary history though. You understand how evolution works, right? I'm assuming you're not a creationist, correct?
Yes, I'm not a creationist. I appreciate that.
Evolution works because there are environmental pressures that shape our biology, correct?
Yeah, that does seem to be the case.
So hierarchical organizations is a environmental pressure, correct?
No, that's where we disagree. In some societies,
that's interesting.
Yes, for some species, yes, but the point is, if you're going back that far, or even if you're just looking in the field of crustaceans, that there are so many. I can't believe we're talking so much about lobsters.
It's inevitable. Yeah,
it is. All roads. But what it reminds me of most is when I was an undergraduate at university, and you would have like 24 hours left on a deadline, and you would figure out what you needed to say in 2,000 words. And if you don't have a theory, 2,000 words is it's too much. You can't get anything done in that time. So you would figure out the point you wanted to make, and you would write your essay, and then you would go to Google Books and you would search for keywords that would support the theory that you had come up with. Now, I think it's not that I disagree with the science that he's done. It's just that it's so selective as to be not really indicative of anything.
That is so far from, if you know Jordan Peterson, that is so far from how Jordan Peterson's doing this. He's been talking about this stuff for 30 years. Like he wrote a book. He wrote the book Maps of Meaning.
He has what he perceives to be an all-encompassing worldview, and I'm personally very wary of anyone who approaches anything, especially when they're going across disciplines into disciplines where they are not experts.
I want to answer your question, and then I have a question for you. The thing that's fascinating for me about Jordan Peterson, I was super into Jonathan Haidt, who is a moral psychologist. And what fascinates me about Jordan Peterson is the two different ways people look at him. Like, you obviously have a different take on Jordan Peterson than us. We see a completely different person. So it's almost like we're watching the same exact content, but seeing two completely different movies. So that is my interest in Jordan Peterson, because it's fascinating to me to see this going on in our society. And I kind of am mystified. It's a puzzle. Like, how do we get past this for me? So that I think that is fascinating, and it continually happens over and over again, because there's a new article written, and I mean, we read these articles and we're like, where are people seeing this? So Sitch, I feel like I'm talking a lot. Sitch, do you want to give
what was the question you wanted to ask?
I wanted to I spaced on it, so talk for a little bit.
Okay. Well,
now I put you on the spot.
You've ruined it all, Adam. Good job. I don't really want to go back to the lobster thing, but I know we've talked about somewhat, but it's so confusing to me, because if he had used the example of chimpanzees or baboons, which are, closer to our ancestry, would that be okay then? Because it's not so far away.
It would be indicative of more, but the thing is, it would be less in line with what he wants to say. I mean, if you look at, I believe, and again, please, I'm not a biologist, but I believe that our closest biological neighbor, that's definitely not the right word, is the bonobo. And the bonobo has like a completely different organization than we do. It's like,
but they still do have a hierarchical structure.
Yeah, that
structure in which a pregnant mother will continue having sex with many, many other males. Then I believe all of those males will be invested in the raising of that infant. And the more monkeys she's slept with, the more bonobo she slept with, the greater the chances of that monkey's survival into adulthood, into maturity, because the more monkeys it has looking out for itself. And that doesn't indicate anything to me about how we organize our society.
Well, doesn't it indicate that that hierarchies existing is biological, but the way in which that they're structured could be social?
I don't know enough biology to know whether
so
every single ancestor that we could possibly
do you think
has a hierarchical component to that?
So you don't think that in humans there's a biological drive pushing humans to organize in hierarchical structures?
Honestly, I don't know. That would be the only honest answer I could give you.
That was my question, actually, was what was your take on hierarchies? Like, what is your personal opinion? We never got to political designations. I mean, I consider myself a centrist. I think Sitch is center left.
I'm more liberal than you, probably.
Yeah. What is are you politically on the left, or I'm assuming you are?
It's an interesting word to use, because I think actually all of this cultural conversation that we're having, it's all about negotiating where that center is. I think the center has been dragged more towards the right in the past few decades, and in the past few years, in terms of the the conversations we find ourselves having, I think, at quite an alarming speed.
What
And
what
I think so much.
So what is your take on hierarchies?
My take on them. So my this isn't so much a take on hierarchies, but I don't actually believe that we can attribute so much of our organizations to biology uncritically, which is not to suggest he's doing it uncritically, but I believe that just because something, I think one of the interesting things about humans as opposed to other animals, I think we have a few things that seem to distinguish us. We seem to have languages with tense systems and various other components that do seem to mark us apart. And we seem to have music, and we seem to also have the ability to act in ways that are unnatural. We have the ability to marry one another. We have the ability to maintain monogamous relationships. We have the ability to decide to be vegetarian. And those things may not be in our biological makeup, but they are healthy and possibly healthier than some natural alternatives. So I personally, and I feel like this is a bit of a swerve, but I feel like I'm not that in the idea of whether or not a hierarchy is a biological drive, because I don't think biological drives are actually necessarily in line with our moral organization of society. And I think while they are a component, perhaps, they might be something to be aspired beyond.
So you would be more for flattening hierarchies then? Sounds like you're saying that you think culturally it would be better if we could move past it.
I would certainly want to look at who they favor, and I would certainly want to look at ways that we could see hierarchies. I mean, I don't really know. I'll be honest. I mean, that implies to me political systems that have also been proven to not work. So I don't know what the answer is to that. But one of the great advantages I have over someone like Dr. Jordan Peterson is that I don't pretend to have an all-encompassing worldview. So I have no answers for the majority of questions.
Sitch, you want to ask anything?
Yeah,
else?
I mean, I agree that Jordan Peterson does have an all-encompassing worldview, which I'm not sure I agree with either. But I wanted to just quickly go back to the idea of talking about the psychology of Hitler and the Nazis and the purpose of that, because I mean, he doesn't get into it in that clip, but he's talked about this. He's talked about the same thing and in the same terms pretty often, and he talks about it he used to talk about it in his teaching classes all the time. And the way that he always framed it, or at least the way that I interpreted it, was that he's exploring the reason it's important for us to understand what makes someone become a Nazi. Now, you said that obviously there's a cultural aspect that wasn't talked about in terms of anti-Semitism, which is true in terms of the target of why someone hates a certain group is part of the culture. And I think Jordan Peterson's focus is more on what causes the hatred in the first place, not where it gets focused.
Yeah.
And the reason that he talks about the psychology of this is that you have to know this, because if you don't know that any person can become an authoritarian or any person can become a Nazi, then you're liable to fall into that pit yourself.
I understand that. I wish we were not paying so much attention to Hitler and to the Nazis in the way that, unfortunately, looking at them through that lens requires, at a time in which we are running out of first-generation Holocaust survivors, at a time when you can go onto Twitter and search Holohoax and be depressed for months at the amount that you will find. I think he is in an unfortunate position, and that clip maybe does misrepresent some of his wider context on that. The unfortunate position he is in is that he is going to be spread very widely and is going to be watched by many people who maybe don't, like me, have the same context that you and Adam obviously have. So I think it is irresponsible, and I think it is dangerous, and I think
What is a responsible way to talk about this in your estimation?
But before that, I mean,
Go ahead, Sitch. Hold on.
is Peterson being irresponsible, or is it the person who cuts, the squirrel avatar on Twitter, who cuts 2 minutes out of a 20-minute conversation and then primes everyone by saying it's Nazi apologia, so you already have that on your mind, and then puts that out there because they're the one that's taking something out of context and priming people to think about this in a specific way.
Unfortunately, and first of all, yes, there is the 2-minute clip. I've not actually seen the 2-minute clip. What is in the 2-minute clip?
It's just the part about him talking about Hitler feeling the disgust and the Zyklon B, and then listening to the crowd and becoming the dark desire of the mob.
I see. Okay. I think it's incredibly dangerous. I think, and what I mean is not what he's saying is incredibly dangerous, although, as you know, I do think that. I think it's incredibly dangerous and incredibly difficult to go about discussions of these topics publicly. And I don't think that he has exercised the care that he would need to do. And the clip that I'm worried about being shared is 7 minutes of him talking uninterrupted. And unfortunately, in the culture we live in, that is more context than most people are afforded. Is he a victim of that? He's a beneficiary of it more than he's a victim of it, I would say.
How so?
So, well, he has harnessed the power of YouTube and harnessed the power of the internet to speak directly to an audience in a way that has massively bolstered his reputation and taken it away from academia into this second career as an orator. And
so you're saying misrepresenting him, and I
don't believe this is the thing though.
I know it's an accusation, but I'm saying let's, for the sake of argument, if he's being misrepresented, you're saying that helps his status? I mean, I don't necessarily disagree that it does, but
no, that's not what I'm saying. Sorry, I'm saying the medium that he is now being shared through is the medium that he himself has favored and has chosen. And look, if he was an academic and he was sticking to academia and he really wanted to deal with these issues in a less, I was going to say populist, I'll say popular way, then academics don't tend to get that same kind of exposure. They seem to, they are afforded a lot more context.
But in moral psychology, which is in a very unique situation, I mean, people follow their moral intuitions, and this leads to disastrous public policy. In order to get to good public policy, we really have to understand those moral intuitions, and we have to understand them in an academic setting, exactly like you're saying. But sooner or later, it has to come out of that academic setting if we're going to harness the power of what we learned in academia to make social change that's going to be beneficial for all of us. I mean, hypothetically, hear me out a second here. Hypothetically, if we lean more towards the biologically determinist side of the equation, okay? And I'm saying this with all, I know you're full skeptical about it. I'm skeptical about it, okay? I think culture and biology have some interplay. But let's just, for the sake of argument, say that it's more biology than anything. And we have these kind of programs that are running in us. Wouldn't you want to know that those programs are there and have every ability to circumvent that programming? I mean, that's
a big question. And there are questions even beneath that I can't even begin to touch on, like
But it's a completely hypothetical situation, though. I mean, I would want to be able to circumvent that programming. I mean, we have circumvented that programming in other areas of our lives.
Using it from our societal organizations and our cultural norms. Yes, I would like to know that, but I don't believe that there is a way to completely untease those two things. And I believe that while these things exist on a spectrum, it tends to be reflective of, in his case, a quite conservative agenda.
Well, you keep saying dangerous, and I'm just trying to hone in on what exactly is dangerous. You think that talking about these things brings people to the cause. You're afraid that it's going to inflame the passions of people towards anti-Semitism. And
what I'm most afraid of is that people who have a casual understanding and a casual fandom of Jordan Peterson will see a 2-minute or a 7-minute clip of him talking about how the Jews disgusted Hitler, and in a cultural moment in which white supremacists are marching through universities and the president of the US is all but condoning them, I think they might take that, quote unquote, the wrong way. So I do think that, unfortunately, this is all part of a much larger discussion. This has been a lot about Jordan Peterson, and then it hasn't been about him at all, really. And I've really enjoyed this conversation for probably exactly those reasons.
Yes, it sounds like we're wrapping up here. I know you've been very generous with your time, and you've gone a lot longer than you said that you would. Do you have any closing questions, Sitch? Do you have anything you want to say?
No, I'm glad that you could join us. I enjoyed this conversation a lot.
Well, thanks very much. Hopefully we'll do it again sometime. I really enjoyed it. So thanks very much for getting in touch.
We'll let you go, and I'll follow.
I'll share it on Twitter in a week or two when I feel comfortable going back on there.
Yeah, how did you get a lot of hate over this article? I mean, what was the response?
Yeah. I think this is kind of, well, I think he shared it himself. He was very unhappy with it. So overnight I'd had very little, and then I woke up to a little bit of a storm on Saturday morning or Friday morning. Friday morning, I think it was. So yeah, there's been quite a lot, but you know what? As we said, it is not the best platform to have those discussions. So I think it's probably best just to let that.
You've helped us. You've helped us understand things that I had never really considered. So
likewise. So really, honestly, this has been a real pleasure.
All right, Sitch, any final words, or should I just cut the stream?
Sounds good.
You can go ahead and drop out. We're going to do another stream shortly here, so we're going to look at the Hugo
and stay in touch, and maybe we'll talk again.
Yeah,
sure.
Take care, Matt.
Cool. Take care.
You too. Bye.
So we're gonna do. Do you want to say anything or talk about? We might as well put it on this stream if you have any afterthoughts.
I mean, I think it was very interesting, especially when we get into the specifics. The thing about the disgust being not, I think it's a good point that he made about, how when most people think of disgust, it kind of has a intentional connotation to it because something disgusts you. It's not like when you hate something, it's like you're intending to hate something.
Right.
But when you're disgusted by something, it's like, oh, you just have this feeling that's caused by something else. And I think that's an interesting point, and I think it's a valid point. And it kind of goes into, unfortunately, what we've talked about, which is, Jordan Peterson has like this since he has this kind of all-encompassing worldview, it's like you have to know the Jordan Peterson lore, that stems back to really understand a lot of the things he's saying. And I think the disgust one is a perfect example of that.
In the context of moral psychology, Jonathan Haidt came up with something called the social intuitionist model. And this is why Jonathan Haidt's position is completely untenable, is because it does. I mean, he has experimental data to back this up. People get, like, the disgust and the hate are basically related. People get that unconscious disgust, and it doesn't always turn into hate, but it can turn into hate. It definitely can. So,
right. But to the layman, they're not making those connections in their mind.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Because like in his article, because the way he frames it is that, he doesn't frame it as neutrally as I would have liked, but the way it's framed is that the disgust, is kind of like giving Hitler an out for not being responsible for his actions.
Yeah, that's an interesting takeaway. Hey, it occurred to me too that we might have super chats to read too. I don't even have the chat up. So
I do. Okay. Pragmatic Culture for $5. Did y'all hear Peterson is apparently a Duganist, aka Nazi boy? The individualist centrist to Nazi boy pipeline is real. LOL. Okay, another 5 from Pragmatic Culture. Tell the wannabe psychoanalyst here to go back to choking. Okay, we're not going to read anything.
Who was the wannabe psychoanalyst? Is it you or?
No, he's talking about Matt.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no
hate.
I don't want to read anything too insulting.
Yeah, he was nice enough to actually talk to us. So I mean, Riley Dennis isn't jumping on a live stream with us, so he's got more balls than Riley Dennis.
Oh, how dare you! How dare you?
Oh, that was an accidental joke, but I take full credit for it.
Ethan Long for $5. What petty pedantic BS? Didn't like Matt either. Ethan Miller for $1 with no message. Pragmatic Culture with another $2.
Oh my God, we're triggering the shit out of Pragmatic Culture.
Yeah, Pragmatic Culture is just paying us lots of money today. I wish Peterson were more of a biodeterminist. And Pragmatic Culture for another $2. Which common ancestor named the species? Yeah, I was kind of curious about that because he was saying that the common ancestor apparently we share with lobster doesn't have.
I know.
Hierarchies.
Is it horseshoe crabs? Because they have blue blood.
I
was like,
but I didn't want to get into that because that it's kind of getting bogged down in a scientific argument that I don't think is valid because I'm pretty sure that when you have mechanisms that get passed through different species through evolution, like they can go away and then come back. That doesn't mean, but they don't like disappear forever. Like they're just dormant in your DNA.
Yeah.
So you can have things that evolved from hierarchies and then they can evolve into a species that doesn't have hierarchies. Yeah. And then something else down the line can have hierarchies.
They talk about junk DNA sometimes, and really they're discovering that that's not really junk DNA, that's just DNA that's presently turned off. It's like,
yeah, exactly. The lobster thing, I don't know. It feels like it's hard to make headway in that because I don't know. I feel like we're being as clear as possible, and it's just saying that hierarchies are biological. And I guess if you don't believe that, then you don't believe that. But I don't see why that's a ridiculous thing to bring up.
Is that all for super chats?
Oh, one more was Sheep Lavender for $5. This stream is sponsored by Red Lobster. Very true.
So we're gonna let's take a little break and then we'll jump back on and do Hugo and Jake. Is that what we're doing?
So are we gonna do a completely new stream, or are we gonna just do it on this?
I was thinking we would do a new stream just so this is a clean piece of content.
Right. Okay, sounds good.
All right, we'll be back, guys.